One unexpected family decision forced your soulmate to choose between you and marriage. My beloved child. Your soulmate thought they still had time to decide what their future would look like, until one unexpected family decision changed everything overnight. A marriage conversation that was supposed to happen months from now was suddenly moved forward, and everyone seemed to expect an immediate answer. But there was one problem nobody wanted to discuss: you. Your soulmate had already formed a connection with you that couldn't simply be erased because someone else had designed a different future for them. And then something unusual happened. During that family conversation, your name was mentioned by someone who should not have known anything about you. Your soulmate froze. How did they know? Who had told them? And why did the entire room become uncomfortable the moment your name appeared? Don't skip, because that question uncovered the first clue that this marriage decision wasn't nearly as sudden as everyone was pretending. Your soulmate began quietly connecting the pieces. Certain family members had been asking strange questions for weeks, questions about where they went, who they spoke with, and whether there was someone they were becoming serious about. At the time, those questions seemed harmless. Now they felt completely different. The family hadn't discovered you accidentally. They had known there was someone important in your soulmate's life, and instead of asking your soulmate directly, they had made a decision behind closed doors. That realization changed something inside them. For the first time, your soulmate wasn't simply wondering whether they should follow the family's expectations. They were wondering why everyone seemed so determined to make them choose quickly. Then came another surprise. The person they were expected to marry apparently knew there was someone else in their heart. And rather than becoming upset, that person said something remarkably calm: you should find out what you truly want before agreeing to anything. Suddenly, your soulmate realized they weren't trapped between two people. They were standing between two completely different futures. But the most important moment came later, when your soulmate finally confronted the family member who had pushed hardest for this marriage. Stay till the end, because the response exposed a truth nobody had planned to reveal. Your soulmate asked one simple question: why are you so afraid of me choosing this person? There was no immediate answer. Just silence. Then the truth slowly surfaced. The family wasn't afraid that you weren't good enough. It was almost the opposite. They had noticed how differently your soulmate behaved whenever you were mentioned: more certain, more independent, more willing to make their own decisions. Choosing you would mean your soulmate was no longer allowing the family to control every major step of their future. And that was the real conflict hiding behind the marriage decision. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate finally understood what they were actually being asked to choose between. Yet before they could give their answer, another family member entered the conversation carrying information about you that changed the entire room again. The room changed the instant that information was placed in front of your soulmate. It wasn't something negative about you. That was the surprise. It was proof that someone in the family had quietly looked into your life because they wanted to understand why your soulmate refused to let this connection go. They expected to discover a reason to separate you. Instead, they found something that made one family member question the marriage decision entirely. You had been building your own path without asking anyone to rescue you, and your soulmate had noticed that strength long before anyone else did. Suddenly, the argument wasn't about whether you belonged in their future. It was about why the family had never given you a fair chance. Your soulmate looked around the room and realized something important. Not everyone supported the decision anymore. Don't skip, because one unexpected person was about to change sides. It was the quietest member of the family, the person who had barely spoken during every previous discussion. Until that moment, your soulmate assumed they agreed with everyone else. But then this person asked a question nobody could easily answer. If the marriage is truly right, why does it require someone to abandon the person they genuinely want? Silence followed. Your soulmate didn't need to defend you anymore. Someone else had finally said what they had been thinking all along. Then another detail emerged. The marriage had been accelerated because certain relatives feared your soulmate would soon make a serious commitment to you. They weren't responding to uncertainty. They were responding to certainty. Your connection had become real enough that waiting any longer might mean losing their influence over the decision completely. And that revelation gave your soulmate something they hadn't felt throughout this entire situation: clarity. They finally understood why everything had happened so quickly. But clarity didn't make the next choice easy. Your soulmate knew that refusing the marriage could create disappointment throughout the family, while accepting it would mean walking toward a future they had never freely chosen. Then they thought about you, not an imagined version of you, but the person who had never demanded that they choose sides. That mattered more than anyone realized. Stay till the end, because your soulmate finally stood and said they would give everyone an answer, but only after one final conversation. The family assumed that conversation would be with the person they were expected to marry. It wasn't. Your soulmate wanted to speak privately with the relative who had originally started this entire arrangement. And behind that closed door, they learned something nobody else in the family knew. The marriage decision had been built around an old promise, but the person who made that promise had secretly changed their mind months ago. And left one condition that could completely free your soulmate from it. That one condition turned everything upside down. The old promise had never been meant to control your soulmate forever. It included a choice everyone had conveniently stopped mentioning. If your soulmate had already found someone they genuinely wanted to build a future with, the arrangement could be reconsidered. And suddenly, every rushed conversation made sense. Certain family members knew that condition existed. They also knew about you. That was why everything had been pushed forward before your soulmate could openly declare what you meant to them. For several seconds, your soulmate said nothing. They weren't angry. They were stunned by how close they had come to accepting a future based on incomplete information. But then they asked the question that mattered most: who knew about this? The answer revealed that only 3 people had known. And one of them was the very person who had been pressuring your soulmate the hardest. What happened next wasn't dramatic on the surface, but emotionally, everything shifted. Your soulmate returned to the family gathering carrying a confidence nobody had seen earlier. They didn't argue. They didn't accuse anyone. They simply explained that they now understood the full promise and would make their decision with every fact on the table. Don't skip, because this is where the person connected to the proposed marriage did something completely unexpected. Instead of fighting to keep the arrangement alive, they stepped forward and admitted they didn't want a marriage built on obligation either. They had their own dreams, their own unanswered questions, and their own reasons for feeling uncomfortable with the family's plan. Two people who had been presented as each other's inevitable future suddenly agreed on the same thing. Neither wanted their lives decided without their voices. But your soulmate still hadn't said your name. Not yet. They were saving that truth for the moment nobody could interrupt. Then came the question everyone had been avoiding: if you don't choose this marriage, what exactly are you choosing? Your soulmate looked toward the family member who had tried hardest to keep you out of the conversation. Stay till the end, because their answer wasn't simply, "I choose you." It went deeper. Your soulmate explained that choosing you represented something they had never been allowed to choose before: the right to decide what kind of life felt authentic to them. You hadn't pressured them. You hadn't demanded promises. Yet somehow, knowing you had made them brave enough to question a future written by other people. The room went completely still. For the first time, nobody had an immediate response. And just when it seemed your soulmate had finally broken free from the arrangement, the oldest person in the room quietly spoke your name and revealed they had actually known about you before anyone else did. No one expected the oldest person in the room to know your name, especially your soulmate. Until that moment, everyone believed the secret had traveled through whispers and private questions. But this person calmly explained that they had heard about you months earlier, long before the marriage arrangement became urgent. Your soulmate had mentioned you once without realizing how much emotion entered their voice. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a serious conversation. Yet one tiny detail had remained unforgettable: whenever your soulmate spoke about the future, uncertainty filled their words, but when they spoke about you, that uncertainty disappeared. The elder noticed it immediately. And instead of interfering, they waited. They wanted to see whether you were simply passing through your soulmate's life or whether this connection would survive pressure, distance, and family expectations. Now they finally had their answer. But what they said next surprised everyone even more. They revealed that the original family promise had never been about forcing two people into marriage. Over time, relatives had turned an old understanding into something far more rigid than it was ever intended to become. The elder remembered the original conversation clearly, and there had always been room for personal choice. Suddenly, the strongest argument supporting the arranged future began falling apart. Don't skip, because your soulmate then discovered something even more meaningful. The elder had intentionally remained silent during earlier discussions because they wanted your soulmate to speak for themselves. If someone rescued them immediately, they might never know whether they were truly ready to choose their own future. And now they had. Your soulmate had walked into that room uncertain and overwhelmed, but they were standing there completely different. They weren't choosing you simply because the alternative felt wrong. They were choosing the possibility of discovering where your connection could honestly lead. Still, one final obstacle remained. The family member who had pushed hardest for the marriage wasn't ready to surrender. They asked your soulmate a question designed to create doubt: how can you risk everything for someone when you don't know exactly what happens next? Your soulmate paused, because there was truth inside that question. No relationship comes with a guaranteed ending. No future arrives with every answer already written. But then your soulmate said something nobody expected: they weren't asking the family to guarantee a future with you. They were asking for the freedom to discover it themselves. Stay till the end, because those words changed the entire conversation. Several relatives who had remained neutral finally supported your soulmate's decision. The pressure surrounding the marriage began disappearing piece by piece. It seemed the choice had finally been made, until the elder asked everyone to remain seated and revealed there was one last reason the family had become so interested in you, and even your soulmate had never heard it before. The elder waited until every voice in the room had gone quiet before revealing what had been kept hidden. Months earlier, someone close to the family had crossed paths with you without realizing who you were. It had been an ordinary interaction, brief enough that you probably never gave it another thought. But something about the way you handled that moment stayed with them. Later, when your name surfaced during conversations about your soulmate, that person recognized it and quietly told the elder what they remembered. This was why the elder had never immediately opposed you. They already had a small glimpse of your character before anyone started forming opinions. But there was another detail. The person who had met you hadn't simply described you positively, they had said something that made the elder wonder whether your connection with your soulmate had begun changing both of your lives in ways neither of you fully understood yet. Your soulmate leaned forward, expecting some dramatic secret, but the truth was surprisingly simple. They were told that since you entered their life, they had started speaking differently about their own future. They had become more willing to question expectations, more serious about their goals, and less afraid of making decisions independently. The family had noticed these changes but interpreted them in completely different ways. Some saw growth. Others saw distance. And the person pushing the marriage hardest had mistaken your soulmate's independence for your influence taking control. Don't skip, because your soulmate finally corrected that misunderstanding. You had never told them to reject their family. You hadn't asked them to abandon traditions or prove anything. The change came from within. Knowing you had simply shown them that a relationship could leave room for honesty and personal choice. That distinction mattered, and for the first time, even the strongest opposition began losing its certainty. Then your soulmate did something nobody had prepared for. Instead of demanding immediate approval for you, they asked the family for time. Not time to reconsider the arranged marriage, that decision was becoming clear, but time to let everyone meet the real you before making another judgment. The elder agreed almost instantly. Others followed, one by one, until only one person remained silent. Something huge is waiting for you, because this was the same relative who had created most of the pressure from the beginning. Everyone expected another objection. Instead, they looked directly at your soulmate and admitted there was a personal reason they had fought so hard against this connection, a reason that had almost nothing to do with you. They had once faced a choice painfully similar to your soulmate's, and the decision they made years ago had shaped every warning they were giving now. For the first time, the relative who had resisted you stopped defending the marriage arrangement and started explaining themselves. Years earlier, they had cared deeply for someone their own family refused to accept. Instead of challenging expectations, they chose the future everyone considered safer. From the outside, their decision looked responsible. Inside, however, one unanswered question remained with them for years: what would their life have looked like if they had been brave enough to choose for themselves? That memory had quietly shaped everything happening now. They weren't trying to separate your soulmate from you because they knew something terrible about your connection. They were afraid your soulmate might make an uncertain choice and someday regret it. But there was a painful contradiction they had never noticed. They were pushing your soulmate toward the exact kind of decision they still questioned in their own past. Your soulmate listened without interrupting, and suddenly the conflict felt completely different. What had seemed like control was partly fear passed from one generation to another. But understanding that fear didn't mean surrendering to it. Your soulmate asked, if you could return to that moment, would you still let everyone else decide? The relative couldn't answer immediately. Don't skip, because their silence became more powerful than any argument they had made before. Eventually, they admitted they didn't know what they would choose. But they wished someone had given them permission to discover the answer for themselves. That sentence changed the atmosphere in the room. Your soulmate wasn't asking everyone to believe your connection would automatically become perfect. They were asking for the same freedom this relative had once wanted. And slowly, the person who had created the greatest resistance began understanding why forcing the marriage forward could repeat an old mistake instead of preventing a new one. Then came the moment nobody expected. The relative turned toward the elder and asked for the marriage discussions to be stopped completely until your soulmate could make a decision without pressure. No deadline. No hidden agreement. No family vote deciding the outcome. Your soulmate finally had the freedom they had been fighting for, but instead of celebrating immediately, they became unusually quiet. Stay till the end, because freedom created a new question they could no longer avoid. Without family pressure standing between you, what did they truly want from this connection? Your soulmate already knew the answer in their heart, but they wanted their next move to come from certainty rather than emotion alone. So they made one final request. Before announcing any decision about their future, they wanted a private conversation with you. And there was one question they had been holding back for months, a question whose answer could determine what happened next. That question had nothing to do with whether you could impress their family. Your soulmate wanted to know something far more important. If all the pressure disappeared, would you still choose to explore a future with them, not because you had fought so hard to reach this point, but because the connection itself was worth choosing? For months, circumstances had made everything feel like a battle between you and marriage. Now the battle was over, and your soulmate could finally separate genuine feelings from outside pressure. They imagined sitting across from you without relatives, expectations, or deadlines surrounding the conversation. There would be no dramatic demand for an instant promise. Just honesty. Because after everything that had happened, your soulmate understood that choosing you shouldn't mean exchanging one obligation for another. It should mean two people freely deciding what comes next. And that realization made the conversation they wanted with you even more important. Before that conversation could happen, however, another unexpected message reached your soulmate. The person connected to the proposed marriage wanted to speak privately one last time. At first, your soulmate hesitated, wondering what could possibly remain unsaid. But what they heard brought an entirely new perspective. That person admitted they had also felt trapped by the arrangement and had quietly hoped someone would finally challenge it. They weren't disappointed that your soulmate had chosen another direction. They were relieved. Don't skip, because they also revealed one detail nobody else knew. Several weeks earlier, they had overheard relatives discussing how serious your soulmate seemed about you. That conversation was what triggered the sudden push toward marriage. The family decision hadn't created your soulmate's feelings. What your soulmate had written that night wasn't a dramatic promise or a perfect picture of forever. It was something much more personal, a list of the things they wanted to experience only if the future was freely chosen. Ordinary mornings without pretending. Difficult conversations without running away. Plans made together instead of decisions handed down by other people. And beside those thoughts, your name appeared more than once. That was the detail they had never told anyone. Even while the family was pushing them toward marriage, their private vision of the future kept returning to you. But one sentence at the bottom of the page mattered most: I don't want to choose someone because I'm afraid of losing everyone else. Your soulmate read that line again and realized the unexpected family decision had forced them to confront something bigger than marriage. It had forced them to discover whose life they were actually living. When they finally imagined telling you everything, another emotion surfaced: uncertainty about what you had experienced while they were pulling away. Your soulmate knew you might have noticed the silence, the hesitation, the sudden distance. You may have wondered whether their feelings had disappeared. In reality, every step backward had happened while they were trying to understand how to move forward without making promises they couldn't yet protect. Don't skip, because this realization changed how they planned to approach you. They weren't going to arrive expecting you to immediately understand or accept every decision. They wanted to explain the truth and then listen. For once, your voice would matter as much as theirs. And that was something the family arrangement had never allowed either person involved to have. Your soulmate now understood that a meaningful future couldn't begin with pressure, even if the pressure was disguised as love, tradition, or responsibility. But just before your soulmate was ready to reach out, the elder asked for one final private conversation. This time, there was no warning and no attempt to change their mind. Instead, the elder handed them the original written record of the family promise, the very document everyone had been interpreting for years. Stay till the end, because your soulmate discovered a line nobody had mentioned during any previous discussion. The agreement didn't simply allow them to choose another path. It specifically said that when personal commitment already existed, family expectations should never replace that commitment. Your soulmate stared at those words, realizing the entire conflict had been built around a tradition that had been misunderstood. Then the elder pointed to a handwritten note beside that sentence, written years later by the person who created the promise. Your soulmate read it once, then again, because those few words revealed exactly what that person believed should happen when someone was forced to choose between family expectations and the person their heart had already chosen. Those handwritten words were surprisingly simple: a family promise should protect someone's future, never decide it for them. Your soulmate sat completely still. For weeks, everyone had treated the marriage arrangement like an unbreakable responsibility, yet the person who created it had believed the opposite. The original intention had been distorted over time until tradition became more important than choice. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why the elder had preserved that document. It wasn't evidence against the family. It was a reminder of what the family had forgotten. And then the elder asked one final question: if nobody here expected anything from you, where would you go right now? Your soulmate didn't need time to think. Their mind immediately went to you. Not to a ceremony. Not to an arrangement. To one honest conversation where nothing was hidden anymore. But before leaving, your soulmate did something nobody expected. They returned to the family room and placed the original document where everyone could read it. There was no argument this time. No one needed convincing. The handwritten note spoke for itself. Don't skip, because the relative who had pushed hardest for the marriage was the first person to respond. They admitted that somewhere along the way, fear had made them protect tradition more fiercely than the person tradition was supposed to protect. Then they looked at your soulmate and said something that would have seemed impossible only hours earlier: go find your own answer. That wasn't complete approval of you, not yet. But it was something more valuable than forced acceptance. It was permission for your soulmate to stop living inside someone else's expectations. And for the first time since this began, nobody stood between your soulmate and the door. Yet when your soulmate finally prepared to speak with you, they realized the hardest conversation was still ahead. Stay till the end, because they weren't simply coming to tell you, "I chose you." They wanted to explain why that sentence had taken so long. They wanted you to know about the family decision, the hidden promise, their hesitation, and the fear that had caused their distance. Most importantly, they wanted to ask what you wanted after hearing everything. Your soulmate had learned that real choice must exist on both sides. So they folded the handwritten page they had created during that difficult night and kept it with them, planning to show it to you only after you had spoken freely. But before they could reach you, they received one final message from the family, and the person who sent it had never supported your connection before. The message contained only a few lines, but your soulmate read them twice before moving. It came from the family member who had questioned your connection from the beginning, the one who had always believed the safer future was the arranged one. Yet there was no warning this time. Instead, they admitted they had been watching everything unfold and had finally understood something important: your soulmate wasn't becoming distant from the family because of you. They were becoming capable of making decisions without needing everyone's permission. That difference changed everything. The message ended with an unexpected request: when the time was right, they wanted to meet you personally rather than judge you through stories, assumptions, or second-hand information. Your soulmate hadn't expected acceptance to begin this way. But now another question appeared: how would you feel knowing the people who once resisted you were suddenly asking for a chance to understand you? Your soulmate decided not to answer that question for you. That was the old pattern: other people deciding what someone else should feel. They had finally learned better. So when they prepared for the conversation with you, they removed every expectation from their mind. No rehearsed outcome. No demand that you immediately forgive the distance. No assumption that because they had challenged the marriage arrangement, you now owed them a future. Don't skip, because this is where their choice became deeper than simply rejecting a marriage. Your soulmate understood that choosing you meant respecting your freedom to choose them too. They wanted to tell you what happened, explain why they became quiet, and admit that their feelings had remained present even when their behavior suggested otherwise. Then they would ask the question they had been afraid to ask from the beginning: knowing everything now, do you still want to discover where this could go? But there was something they planned to show you before you answered: the page they had written during the night when the family pressure felt strongest. Stay till the end, because your soulmate had added one new sentence beneath everything they wrote before. It wasn't about defeating the family. It wasn't about proving the marriage arrangement wrong. It said that whatever happened next, they wanted their future decisions to come from honesty rather than fear. And beneath that sentence, they had written your name one final time. Then something unexpected happened. Before your soulmate could begin the conversation they had prepared so carefully, the elder contacted them again with news. The family wanted to gather once more, but this time there would be no discussion about arranging a marriage. Instead, they wanted your soulmate to bring someone with them, and for the first time, the invitation was meant for you. The invitation changed the meaning of everything that had happened. Until now, you had existed inside that family mostly as a name. Someone discussed, questioned, and judged without ever being given a voice. Now they were asking you to enter the very room where your soulmate had once been pressured to choose a different future. But your soulmate didn't immediately accept on your behalf. They remembered what they had just learned about freedom and choice. So they made one thing clear to the family: you would come only if you wanted to. No pressure. No test. No expectation that you prove yourself worthy of anyone's approval. That boundary surprised several relatives, but the elder supported it immediately. And then came another unexpected detail. The gathering wasn't being organized to evaluate you. The relative who had resisted you most wanted to say something directly to you, something they refused to send through your soulmate. Your soulmate wondered whether inviting you into this situation was fair after everything you had already unknowingly been placed inside. That question stayed with them. Don't skip, because instead of hiding the complicated truth to make things easier, they decided you deserved the complete story first. They would tell you about the rushed marriage decision, the old promise, the missing condition, and the disagreement that divided the family. They would even admit how close they came to staying silent simply because silence seemed easier than challenging everyone at once. But they also wanted you to understand the turning point. When the pressure finally disappeared, their feelings for you didn't disappear with it. That was how they knew this wasn't rebellion disguised as love. They weren't moving toward you because someone told them not to. They were moving toward you because, after every outside voice became quiet, yours was still the connection they wanted to understand. And yet the family gathering held one more surprise that even your soulmate didn't know about. Stay till the end, because while preparations were being made, the elder privately contacted the person who had originally been connected to the proposed marriage. Not to reopen the arrangement. Not to reconsider anything. They wanted that person present for a completely different reason. They believed both people deserved the chance to close this chapter without carrying resentment into their separate futures. When your soulmate learned this, they hesitated. Until they received a message directly from that person saying they wanted the same thing. Something huge was shifting. What began as a family decision forcing two people toward marriage was becoming a moment where everyone involved could finally choose freely. But there was still one unanswered question: what exactly did the relative who had opposed you for so long want to say when they finally stood face to face with you? The answer was nothing your soulmate had predicted. The relative who had resisted you wasn't preparing another argument, they were preparing an apology. Not because every doubt had magically disappeared, but because they finally recognized how unfairly they had treated someone they had never even met. They had turned you into a symbol of everything they feared losing: family influence, familiar traditions, and the future they had imagined for your soulmate. Yet none of those fears actually described you. The relative admitted privately to the elder that meeting you now felt uncomfortable for one reason: they would have to face the person they had judged without evidence. But your soulmate saw something important in that discomfort. It meant the family was finally questioning itself instead of constantly questioning you. Don't skip, because that shift was about to change the purpose of the gathering completely. Meanwhile, the person once connected to the proposed marriage made their own decision. They wanted everyone to know that ending the arrangement hadn't taken something away from them. It had returned something: the freedom to imagine a future they actually wanted. That mattered because some relatives still quietly believed your soulmate had destroyed a perfectly good plan simply because you appeared. Now that argument disappeared. Both people involved in the arrangement were saying the same thing independently. Neither wanted a marriage created from expectation. Neither wanted resentment hidden beneath obedience. And suddenly, you were no longer standing between your soulmate and a supposedly perfect future. The truth was clearer: that future had never belonged to either of them. Your connection had simply forced everyone to notice the problem sooner. But your soulmate still had one concern. They didn't want the family gathering to become another moment where everyone discussed your future while you sat silently listening. So before anything happened, your soulmate made a private decision that surprised the elder. If you chose to attend, you would be the first person invited to speak after the family explained itself. No interruptions. No defending old decisions. No pressure to forgive anyone immediately. Stay till the end, because your soulmate had finally understood that standing beside you meant more than declaring feelings when emotions were high. It meant making space for your truth too. The elder agreed, and even the relative preparing the apology accepted the condition. Everything seemed ready for the most honest conversation this family had experienced in years. Then, just before the gathering was supposed to begin, the elder opened an old envelope that had been stored with the original family promise. Inside was a second handwritten note nobody remembered seeing, and the first sentence suggested the person who created the marriage understanding had once faced almost the exact same choice your soulmate was facing now.